that I hear often in reviews are, I feel like I went to Egypt. I felt like I traveled there. And that really warms my heart. It's something that I really aim to do, and I'm really, really glad that somehow I seem to manage it.
There are tales of rogues and hordes, of stratagems and wars. There's a tale for every season of the year. There are tales of knights and queens, of drudgery and dreams. There's a tale for everybody here. There are stories galore, in volumes by the score, on every subject throughout history. It's all waiting in Pandora's library.
Welcome to Pandora's Library, a monthly podcast about books that feature the mysterious, fantastical, dark, and creepy elements of life. If you're listening on the audio podcast, you might like to know that it's also available as a visual podcast on Spotify and YouTube. My name is Karen Hamilton-Vile. I'm a paranormal murder mystery author of a series of books about Ada Baker, a medium who solves crime with the aid of the ghost she lives with. This month, I'm interviewing author Hazel Longuet. When ill health forced Hazel to retire from business consulting, she turned to her dreams to forge a new, gentler path, writing her genre-smashing House of Scarabs, which combines mythology, supernatural suspense, and historical fantasy into an action-packed romp that's like Indiana Jones and Lara Croft meet the Mummy, sprinkled with a dash of the intrigue of the Da Vinci Code. Hazel grew up living in the grounds of Longleat, an Elizabethan stately home, with Saturday jobs that included cleaning out baby lions and guiding visitors around a haunted kitchen. She's lived and worked all over the world, Colombia, Bolivia, Egypt and Dubai, to name a few, and she uses her experiences to colour her writing and guide her location choices. Writing around the energy-limiting boundaries of ME, Hazel's currently working on the first book in a new urban fantasy series. She lives in Devon in the UK with her two harshest critics, her dogs. Hazel, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Can you give us a brief introduction to your House of Scarabs series? What's it all about?
Well, as you said, it's a kind of Indiana Jones action adventure with spiced with the mythology of ancient Egypt, like the Mummy, and then it has a kind of political and religious intrigue going weaved throughout it, which is very similar to the Da Vinci Code. So it really does combine those elements together. I made the classic mistake of writing a story that popped into my brain in a dream, and basically it smashes genres together, which is not necessarily commercially the most sensible thing to do, but it was the book that I wrote and I loved it. But when people read it, they love it too, but it makes it sometimes a bit hard to market because it does sit very squarely in action adventure, historical fantasy, supernatural suspense, so it kind of mushes them all together into one big book.
I think that's quite common for authors to be inspired by dreams. I know I have.
I think so.
I
I think so.
This 5-star review I found of your first novel, House of Scarabs. So says, this is the best book I've read for a very long time. From the start, the story grips you and you can't put the book down. It's a book for everyone, for people who know Egypt and those who want to know. The author shows her knowledge of Egypt through her writing, transferring this into her book. It's a very good mixture, keeping the reader enthralled, which I completely agree with because I have finished book 1 now and I've put book 2 started on that. Yeah, it's excellent. I loved it.
Oh,
I was drawn
I'm so
in
glad.
right
Thank
from the
you.
start. Yeah, I'm quite hard to please as a reader. I think I've got 2 books before which I didn't finish, were professionally published books, but I just couldn't get into the writer's style. But this sort of really drew me in.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's made my day. Thank you. Yeah, I try to, I think because I lived in Egypt for 20 years, so writing, as I said, House of Scarabs came to me literally in a dream, and I got to about 60, 70%, and my husband woke me up with a cup of coffee, which most mornings I'd be like, oh, thank you, darling. That morning I was so livid with him because I just wanted to know the end of this story, what happened. And I didn't know, and it just kept on. It was in my brain, kind of plugging away, and I wanted to know the end. So I sat down and thought, I'm going to write it, and that's how it started. And I think because it was set in my dream, it was set in Egypt, and I've lived in Egypt for 20 years. I know Egypt. I know the people. I know the smells and the tastes and everything. It was really important to me to be really accurate and to try and take my readers to Egypt with me. So things that I hear often in reviews are, I feel like I went to Egypt. I felt like I travelled there, and that really warms my heart. It's something that I really aim to do, and I'm really, really glad that somehow I seem to manage it. In fact, one of the nicest reviews I got, I had two actually that really stuck in my mind. Probably the one that made me cry and that was most emotional for me. I got an email from a lady who was suffering from cancer, and she thanked me and said that House of Scarabs was the only thing that got her through her treatment. She would sit and read it during her chemo, and oh, it just made me cry. And it was really odd actually, because years and years ago, it took me 5 years nearly to write, and when I started, I was about halfway through, and I came back to England to visit my family, and my dad said, oh, I want to go and see a psychic, kind of, it was a big meeting thing, 40, 50 people and a psychic. And I was like, oh, but he really wanted to go, so I went with him. Nobody knew I was coming back. Nobody knew who I was. I just came and sat next to my dad. And this guy was very kind of generic, talking to, is there anybody with a J, or maybe it's an M, that kind of psychic.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was sitting there really skeptically, kind of, and then he just turned and looked at me and went, you're a writer. And I literally, and I didn't even consider myself a writer at that point. I was just, writing down the stream. So, and I'd come to a point where I really had doubts about my ability to write, and I was going through a lot of problems, and I'd put it to the side for about, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. And so definitely in my head, I wasn't a writer. And he just then started to say to me that he had a friend there who had passed away and whose family were living with a lot of concerns about how she died. And all of these things were relevant to a friend of mine who'd passed about 6 months before. And he asked me to pass a message from her to her family. And then after that, he said, she's insisting you carry on writing, because she said, she's got your muse with her, and your muse is saying that you have to finish this book and publish it, because it's going to be really important to someone in the future. Not to you, it's not for you, it's not important to you, but it's really important for somebody who's going to read it in the future. So when I got that review, I was like, I think I know now who it was meant to be written for. So that was lovely. That review was lovely. And then there was another lady who lived on a horse ranch in Australia, really isolated. And she'd always wanted to go to Egypt and never could afford to, and had all these animals, couldn't leave the ranch. And she wrote to me and said, I, for the first time ever, feel like I've really been to Egypt. I've read your book and I feel like I've been there. And she writes to me all the time. She's always nagging me, when's your next book coming out? When's your next book coming out? And we've become almost friendly. So it's nice when that happens, when you get those kind of interactions with your readers.
Oh, they're amazing. I love that. I mean, yeah, because you think about, a lot of us want, commercial success, I suppose, to make it pay and we can carry on doing it. But yeah, even just influencing one person like that is amazing, isn't it? To think that you could have made a change in somebody's life and helped them.
Well, yeah, it really is. And I think my new series is urban fantasy, pure urban fantasy, because I learned my lesson. I'm not going to genre smash anymore. The main reason for listeners is that when you try to sell books in Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of those places, they want to put it on a clearly marked shelf in their store. And my book could fit on about 6 shelves, but doesn't really fit on any. It wobbles on all of them. So I don't think really probably House of Scarabs will ever be necessarily a commercial success. Maybe if I somehow find a way to market it where cross genre is really popular. But to me, it's a major success because of those reviews. And the next series, I will be more commercial. I'll still write from my heart and write the story I want to write, but I will stick to the more rigid premise of genre so that it's easier to market, basically.
Brilliant. So you've touched on it a little bit, but what was your inspiration for writing this series?
I think, as I said, it was a dream, really. I was wanting to know, well, it was twofold. I had the dream and I wanted to know the end of it. And I also became quite poorly. I was misdiagnosed in England with a condition. They thought I had a stomach ulcer, but it turned out to be a gallbladder problem. So I went back to Egypt and they said, take every time you have an attack, take a omeprazole. So I was taking omeprazole, having the attack, and then 20 minutes later the attack would go. So I thought, it's doing its job. But it was a misdiagnosis, and the gallbladder was getting worse and worse until I ended up having emergency surgery. I got sepsis, and at the same time I came down with glandular fever. So it was like a perfect storm, and it destroyed my health and led me ultimately to have ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, sometimes known as chronic fatigue syndrome. Silly name because it's so much more than that. So my career just basically came to a grinding halt. Up until then, I'd been a business consultant. I'd been really work driven. So I was doing 12, 15-hour days regularly, not taking days off, really driven by my career. And suddenly that was gone. I couldn't do it anymore. So I had plenty of time on my hands and no energy other than to sit in bed for long periods of time. So but at the same time, your brain is, when you're not suffering from brain fog, your brain wants to do things still. You just don't have, it's like a battery at 10%. So your brain is still saying, I want to do it, but you don't have the energy to do it. So that kind of drove me to thinking, well, what can I do from a bed or with limited energy? And I thought, well, writing may be a route to do that. So as I'd sat down already and started to try and finish this dream story, and I thought we'll take it more professionally and think about publishing it. And at that time I knew nothing about publishing, and I'd always been an avid reader, but I didn't know anything about the industry. I worked in telecommunications, so very far removed. So I thought, well, I'll look for an agent, try and get published. And then I did some research, and it was around 2012-ish, 2012, 2013. And it was just when self-publishing was taking off and was beginning to be a possibility. So I did loads of research, and I thought, well, I'm a marketing consultant. That's what I do for my career. So I ought to be able to take those skill sets and use them to use those to market the book. And I will pay for an editor. I want to do it professionally, so I'll get an editor to support me. I also, whilst I do marketing, have huge access to graphic designers, so I can use their expertise to teach me how to do graphic design, so I can design my own book covers. So I just basically I do all of my own book covers.
I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Fantastic.
Yeah.
You just had new book covers made, didn't you?
I just redesigned them all. Yeah, I did. Because I was writing in this kind of mashed up genre, I really thought they were my books were urban fantasy to start off with. So I designed covers that were very urban fantasy driven covers at that time. And with a little more time, more people reading the book and telling me, it's kind of urban fantasy, but I would say more supernatural suspense. And then I realised, actually, my covers don't reflect what the book is. So I've just redesigned them into a whole different style of cover than my previous ones. So I basically went from there and thought, well, looked at how much money you would make if you were traditionally published, percentage-wise, versus if you self-published, looked
Hmm.
at what you would get as a very small, tiny new author in, in, in terms of
Peanuts, yeah.
commission, and it's very little. And I thought,
Mm.
well, if I can do all of these things, and if I was going to get a publishing deal, they would ask me probably to contribute towards marketing anyway, because they do mostly these days. So I didn't really see the point. And then I just thought, I'll do it myself. I'll go down the self-publishing route. So I never actually looked any further into officially publishing through a publishing house, and just said, no, I'll do it myself. And I'm really happy with that choice. It's something, sometimes you do wish you had a few other people supporting you, because it can be a bit frantic, especially when you don't have much energy. But I've never really looked back. I'm really glad I made that decision. And that's how I ended up going towards writing, really.
Amazing. So, you said you lived in Egypt for 20 years or so. What's the
Yeah.
most extraordinary thing about living in Egypt that might be different to living in the UK?
To me, the thing that stands out more than anything are the people. Um, I think sometimes we have a skewed view of the Muslim world in the West. But having lived there for so long, I just adore the people. They're the most magical, amazing, friendly, giving, caring, dynamic people I've ever met. And when I was living here, I would hear all the time about Muslim women being suppressed and forced to do things, and, forced to
Hmm.
cover up and all of these things. And yet I went to Egypt, and I've never seen so many female CEOs, CFOs, incredibly
Oh.
tough women who will not take any nonsense. And most of the women rule the houses in Egypt. They are
Mhm.
strong women. You wouldn't want to go up against them. Um, and things like, you can go to the most humble house. They do have quite a social system, a very layered social system. So they call the kind of the farmers, they call fellahin, which literal translation is peasant, but I hate that terminology. But it's
Mm.
people where land has been divided between sons and divided between sons until you get just a tiny strip per person, like the old strip farming in the
Oh, yeah,
UK,
yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing. So they gradually, as generationally, get poorer and poorer and poorer, until they're quite poverty stricken. But these people have hearts as big as a house, and you can, in fact, I have broken down outside people's houses, and they're giving me their food. They have nothing. They have nothing. And
Yeah.
I remember once my friend looked at, we were driving, and there were green mangoes in a tree, and he's Indian. He wanted to get some green mangoes, like unripe mangoes, to make some chutney that he liked. And he stopped, offered to put. We never met these people. We just stopped the car, and it was a very humble house. And they came out and they gave us bags of these mangoes and refused to take anything. And in the end, we were giving biros to the children because we were so embarrassed. We wanted to purchase and they wouldn't allow. So the people are amazing, astounding, and they will find. I set up the mobile, as one of the people who set up the mobile networks over there. And we would set marketing promotions with incredibly tight terms and conditions that in England would have been watertight. You would set it up, walk away. Within about 10 minutes, someone had found a way through the terms and conditions and completely, broke the entire thing. They're so ingenious, craftily ingenious, but so ingenious. So I love it. It's an amazing country, and it's somewhere that I think everybody should visit. The history and the mythology is so rich as well, of course.
I'd love to. And
It's
like I said, my
amazing.
grandfather, I told you from my grandfather, when there loads and loads of time, got a little map of all the places he went to, all the different sites, and but I've never
Why did he
been. So,
visit? Why did he visit?
oh, I can't remember all in my head, but all the old sites. He was interested from a youth because he was born 1910. And so he had all that Howard Carter thing going on as well when he was young. So I think everybody was really interested in Egypt when they had that time. I'll,
Yeah,
I'll show you some time.
yeah. I'd love to. I'd love to see.
And you learnt to speak Arabic while you were living there, didn't you? Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And you use it.
I
You use
speak
it
it
in your
like a
book.
4 or 5 year old, I would say. It's kind of hair blonde girl happy kind of, but I do, yes.
Do you have any useful words or phrases for people when they're travelling?
Yes is Aiwa, Aiwa, like Aiwa. No, which sounds so cute, especially when children say it with a temper tantrum. It's la.
Yeah.
And it sounds really cute. You can imagine a little child going, la. And if you want people, one of the things when you visit Egypt that I always used to warn my visitors is that there is such poverty and there is no support. I mean, we have the National Health Service, we have free education, there's nothing like that. So the money that they make or that they can find from somewhere is so desperately needed. And one of the children that, well, not child, young man who worked for us, had to choose between his brother's wedding or his mother having surgery for an eye, and chose the wedding. And his mum went blind in one eye, and the cost was £15 for the surgery, sterling.
Oh,
So the money is so tight that when you visit Egypt, there is a flurry of people around you trying to sell you things, trying to do things to get tips, etc. And they're not nasty. They're not doing it from a position of malice. They're doing it from a position of not wanting their children to starve. So from that perspective, one of the really important words is imshi, and imshi literally means go walk. Um, but it's used for go away, give me space, no, I'm not interested. It's like it's a good overall word. So you just say imshi. And one of my favourites that just sounds so cute to me is mish mushkela. Mish mushkela. It's not a problem. And I like the cadence of it. It really, so many of their words sound so sweet to the English ear. Sometimes they don't, and they have lots of words that when we hear it, it sounds like a horrific English swear word, and it's very innocent in Arabic. So there were several times that I thought people were swearing profusely at each other, and they were just saying, "I think," but it sounds like something much worse in English. So,
fantastic.
but it's a lovely language, and it's so incredibly rich. It has one of the largest vocabularies in the world. And when you translate from, as I said, I used to work in marketing, so I would get my team to write like a welcome letter to a new customer, and then they would translate it so that into English, so that I could just check that they'd covered everything. And I would look at it, and it would be, our dearest, most esteemed and beloved customer, with the greatest of respect, we here too would like to. And I would be like, this is so waffly and over the top. And they went, oh, it's just polite. And very different. I mean, it's kind of sounded like, I don't know, Victorian English, very proper, but at the same time very ingratiating. It was funny.
I can't imagine that here, could you?
No, not at all.
Oh, lovely. That sounds a beautiful language.
It is a beautiful language. It is.
What was the most unexpected challenge you encountered while writing the series?
I had, because you've read the book, I had a scene in my book. The ancient gods of Egypt have been carried or protected through time in the bodies of 3 disciples and their descendants. So, modern day, I have 3 main characters: Ellie, mid-30s woman, British woman; Gerhard, a German gentleman in his 70s; and Ben, an American archaeologist. And the gods have lived in them their entire life. They don't know that. They're unaware that they're carrying the ancient gods of Egypt within them. So the gods are aware of all their fears, are aware of everything that they have experienced in their life. The gods are aware of. And I was writing a scene where the gods were manipulating were manipulating the characters to do what they wanted them to do. They wanted to be returned to be free, and so they were manipulating the characters. And in my head, I was going through, right, what would the biggest fears be? And I thought it would be quite funny to have the really strong American archaeologist be terrified of spiders. And also, that's one of my fears. In fact, it's one of my biggest fears. So I thought,
Me
okay, I'll
too.
have that. Yeah, and it was a horrific scene for me to write. I was like, and then I had the older gentleman I imagined would be frightened by aging and the inability to move and those things. So, and then I had the main character, Ellie, and I was like, what is a woman's biggest fear? And for me, and I think 95% of women, one of our biggest fears is sexual attack. It's something
Yeah.
that is terrifying and that we all live with. We all go into multi-story car parks and we're looking behind the cars. And I think it's something that men don't necessarily always understand. In fact, my own
No.
father, when he passed away in November of cancer, and I was going back and forth to the hospital late at night, and it was very dark, and I was frightened, and I was telling him this, and he was going, "Why are you frightened?" He didn't understand, and ultimately he brought me a whistle, so that I would have a whistle with me at the time. But he was so shocked, even though he kind of intellectually thought, well, I guess a woman might, but he didn't realise how terrifying it can be late at night in the dark in a car park on your own. And so I went back and forth because I'm a really caring person and I didn't want to trigger anybody. The thought of triggering someone was horrific to me, but at the same time, I didn't want to be disingenuous to the character. I wanted to reflect truly how people think and what we are. But and equally at the same time, I knew that my family would be reading this book. My husband is Egyptian, so I knew my in-laws, who are very devout, would be reading the book. And I didn't really want to write a very graphic sexual attack. But at the same time, I knew, and especially Ellie's been really hurt by men in her life, so she's even more kind of nervous of men than even most women are. So it really had to be her fear. And I talked to my editor, my editor's American, and I spoke to her about it at great length. And I was going, I don't know. And I'd written the scene and it was horrific, absolutely horrific. And I went, no, I've gone too far. And she said, if you're going to do it, you have to commit to it. And I said, well, maybe I should have her being frightened of heights. And she went, no, but that's not Ellie. Ellie legitimately this would be her biggest fear. And you can either not be true to character or you can be true to character and true to what we as women feel. So I did eventually leave that scene in, and it is horrific, and I have had kickback from it from time to time. Sometimes, even now, sometimes, like when you told me you were reading it, I was like, oh my goodness, that scene. And when my mother-in-law said she'd read it, I was like, oh. And my parents were like, can you skip between page this and page that? Just skip. Something nasty happens. Just know that. Let's skip. So yeah, so I think maybe that was the hardest thing I've found, really.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, my own husband, I remember saying once that I wouldn't go for a walk in the countryside on my own down these dark country lanes, even in the day, because you've always got that fear, haven't you? I mean, I've got my own little pink foam spray and a rape alarm that if I do go on my own somewhere, I'll take with me. But yeah, very real fear, for a lot of people.
It really is. And I have a Rottweiler. I mean, I have a big dog that most people are, and wrongly, or I might add, wrongly because they're a gorgeous breed, but people are nervous of them. Even with her, I will only walk in areas that I know are populated. And I live in the most beautiful part of Devon, in very rural, gorgeous Devon, where I could take beautiful... And it makes me angry sometimes, because I want to take beautiful walks through woods. I want to have the freedom to do that. But I don't feel safe. And that's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, I used to feel defiant about it when I was young until I had, luckily, not a bad experience. I think I talked myself out of possibly a mugging rather than a rape, but I think I managed to talk myself out of it because I returned late at night to the wrong station and I had to get a bus from there. And these three guys around me, and it's always in your mind, isn't it? You feel like you're not safe. And after that, I took it a lot more seriously because
Yeah.
it's always there, that thought that something could
And
happen.
actually, going back to what you were saying, oddly enough, I have never felt unsafe in Egypt. If you screamed as a woman, you would be protected. The men would come running. And there's all, I mean, Egypt has got, I don't know, 24 million people, Cairo, sorry. So it's highly populated. And I could walk around 3 o'clock in the morning and not think about it. I never once felt a moment of being unsafe. Women are so respected and protected in Egypt. And that's another difference to the UK. I don't feel safe here as I did in Egypt, definitely not.
So, which Egyptian god fascinates you most? So for me, it's Bastet. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Because I've always
yeah,
loved
yeah.
cats, and my grandfather, who was, like I say, he was an amateur Egyptologist, and he once carved me a statue of, I think it was the Gaia Anderson cat.
Yeah,
Is that how you pronounce it?
Gaia Anderson, yeah.
Which you speak about in your book.
Yeah.
So I've always felt cats are like protectors, so that's why I like them. But which is your favourite god?
I found that such a hard question because what I love about the Egyptian gods, most of them, yeah, really, most of them are modelled on animals and the attributes of the animals. So you have, exactly as you said, Bastet, who is a protector. You have Sekhmet the lion, who is a fierce warrior. You have I mean, just there are so many. Hathor the cow, who is the mother figure and the almost the Mary figure, you would say in Christianity, and so I just find them all fascinating. I can't really answer because I find them all fascinating. I must say, Kefri was an odd choice, but he was in the dream. Kefri, for those of you who don't know, is the scarab-headed god. And he's not a particularly well-known god, really.
I'd never heard of him before your book. No, I must admit.
No, he's not particularly well known, and he's very odd when you see pictures of him because you have a human body with the scarab where the head is. That was really ugly looking god, to be honest. The lioness is so beautiful, and no, Kefri isn't. So I don't know why he was in my dream, really, other than maybe this muse was telling me that's what it had to be. But I had in which one is it? I'm trying to remember if it's House of Scarabs or House of Resurrection. Oh no, no, it's not. It's Genesis, which is the prequel to the stories. In Genesis, the main character Kia is the high seer of Egypt. So she's a psychic or an oracle, really, and she guides the pharaoh, and she's the one who ultimately realizes the gods are under threat and secures their future by finding the three disciples to carry them into the future. And oddly, at the end of the book, I have her. Something happens and there is a memorial. You can imagine what happened if there's a memorial. But there's a memorial put up in her name, which is a scarab pillar that is in the middle of a Karnak temple. And I also then talk about various, Ellie has a scarab, that the main character in modern times has, her house has got scarabs all over it. And I say ultimately that that's been brought over from Egypt. What I didn't know, and the weirdest thing, when I was writing, I thought, what pharaoh shall I use? And I was like, Amenhotep III. Just came to my head. Didn't know anything about the man. Wrote the story, and then I thought, oh gosh, actually that pillar is really a legitimate thing. I can't just write any old pharaoh. I better see who wrote it. Maybe I need to change the pharaoh. When I looked it up, the pharaoh who put the pillar was Amenhotep III. And that he had put plaques of scarabs all over Egypt. Now, whether I knew that from reading it years and years and years ago, and it was just in the back of my head, but I have no recollection of that at all. I was utterly gobsmacked when I was like, oh my goodness. So luckily I didn't have to rewrite anything and it all worked out in the end. So maybe now I love Kefri, my little scarab god, just because he's so lovable when you look at him. But there's also something about the scarab beetles in Egypt. When you see them, it's like the biggest task in the world. They've got this thing that is, I don't know, 10 times their body size, this little ball of mud, let's call it mud, that they push around. And they're so industrious, and they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And in Egyptian mythology, the scarab beetle pushing that is the gods. Oh, this thing keeps falling out my the gods pushing the sun through the sky, and when the little ball of mud goes down into their den, that's night time, and then when it comes up again in the morning. So there's something lovely about Kefri. So I think I'll go with Kefri.
Excellent. So they say it takes a year of life to have enough experience to write a book, and many of the places and people in your book feel like they're based on true experiences. How many years did it take you from first concept of this book to publishing it? Will there be any more in the series as well?
5 years. It took me a long time. I went through a crisis of confidence, as I said, in the middle, and I put it down for nearly a year. And then I was also going through a breakdown in my marriage, returning, leaving Egypt, coming back to England, and my whole life was in turmoil. So it took a long time, mostly because it wasn't my major priority. And also, I've now realised that I'm a very structured writer, so I plot in acute detail every single chapter, the character arcs, the story arcs, everything.
Wow.
So when I sit down, I know exactly what I'm going to write. And what I've realised is that is a process of percolation where it needs to sit and I didn't think it was. I thought I was just slow with House of Scarabs, but with my new book, my new series, which is Born of Angels, the first one, that too, I'm now at 3.5 years of that idea percolating. Again, I've had sadly, I lost my mother and father to cancer within 2 years of each other, and I've nursed them. So that has also slowed the process down. But then I see writers who live through big life crises and they still keep writing. It just seems to slow me down big time. So House of Scarabs was 5 years. It is very much based on places because it's based on what was my home, Egypt. And people. There are certain Gerhard, for instance, the older German gentleman. I call him a gentleman because he really is an old-fashioned, lovely gentleman. He's very, very much based on the Marquis of Bath. Three Marquises of Bath ago. Marquis of Bath is the owner of Longleat House, where I grew up and lived my entire childhood. And the Marquis of Bath, Henry, was the most gentlemanly, sweet, polite, gorgeous gentleman I've ever met. He was just adorable. And I remember once I was in a car journey with him from Longleat to Cheddar, which is quite a long distance. Oh, I mean, it's not very long, but I don't know, 50 minutes. And the journey took us 2 hours because he stopped every single time he saw litter, picked it up, got out of the car, picked up the litter, and he had a black bin bag in his car where he kept it and he just litter picked his whole way to Cheddar. And he was just adorable. So Gerhard is really a reflection of the Marquis of Bath.
Okay.
Very strongly. My memory.
He's the seventh one, is he? Seventh Marquis? He's the one that's probably most famous, isn't he?
He's not the current one is Seolin. Before him was Alexander, who was the hippie Marquis.
Right, okay.
And then
so he's the one before that?
Yeah, Henry, who's Seolin's grandfather.
Oh.
He was the Marquis of Bath the entire time I lived at Longleat. So in my mind, he is Lord Bath, the Marquis of Bath.
Right.
So Gerhard's very much based on him. And when I was writing Gerhard, I was always like, is that what he would do? Is that how he would act? Is that like playing with his glasses and things? There were just mannerisms that I got from him. And then Ben is very much like an amalgam of a couple of my best male friends. So Ellie is a really odd one because of all of the characters I've written, Ellie was like a nagging voice in my head telling me I would never do that. No, that's not me. I would never. So Ellie, maybe a teeny bit of me in her teeny bit, but mostly 99% she came to me fully formed, screaming her storyline, and literally I would be writing and then I'd no in my head. It was so bizarre. So I don't know where she came from, the ether or somewhere, but she's not so much formed on the person.
And you
And
mentioned
oh, you
Longleat
said as
in your
well.
book, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Um, so you cleaned out lions' cages and ghosts as well, you said?
Yeah, at Longleat. I lived there from the age of 7 until I moved out of my parents' house when I was 24. So we lived 5-10 minute walk from the actual house. We lived in the grounds
Yeah.
of the estate. So I grew up lying in bed, hearing lions roaring and peacocks screaming and sea lions making their horrendous racket. So that was quite normal. And then as a child and teenager, I did my Saturday jobs all around Longleat. So my parents ran the garden centre and the butterfly house. My dad ran that. My mum was the head buyer for all the shops. And I worked in the garden centre, then I worked in the Pets Corner, and then I worked as a guide around the Victorian kitchens. But the Pets Corner was really interesting because in the 70s in England, it's very horrendous to think of now, but at the time nobody thought about it. You could have photographs taken with baby lions, and you would pay.
I've done it myself when I was when I was 21. Yeah. I know,
Yeah,
I mean, they wouldn't do it now, but at the time, you
yeah,
didn't
at the
think
time.
about it.
And chimp parties. There were chimp tea parties. So in Pets Corner, they
Wow.
had baby chimps and baby lions, and from there they would have twice a day tea part, which I have to say the baby chimps actually absolutely loved, because they got all sorts of nice food and things,
Mm.
but not politically correct at all. And then the baby lions were kept. They would take one out each day to do photographs with people, and then they would rotate them because you couldn't keep them outside all the time. So I would help clean out the lions' cages and the chimps' cages and the llamas and the parrots and all the other things in Pets Corner. But the lions, particularly, I remember the smell. My God, there is nothing on this world that can describe the smell of lion muck. Horrendous. We used to have 2 scarves around our heads, and you would still could barely breathe from the ammonia, pure ammonia. It was just
Wow.
horrendous. So that was an unusual childhood, I must admit.
It sounds like you had a really interesting life, I have to say. Sounds
Yeah.
amazing. Um, how often do you write, and how do you write? So where do you go to write?
Um, I'm not writing as much at the moment, mostly because of Emmy. My Emmy, as I said, both my mother and father had terminal cancer, and I had to nurse them. Prior to that, they'd been my carers, so I really eroded. We call it our kind of what do you call it? Our energy baseline, basically. So if you have ME, it depends on the severity. It's a scale. But for me, I would say I operate maybe on a really good day, I have 20% of the energy of a normal person. On a really bad day, about 10% ish. And nursing my parents through cancer, because they lived with me,
Mm.
was really, really harsh on my body. So when my father passed in November, I went into a massive crash, because I'd just been, it's like taking an overdraft of energy that I didn't have. And so as soon as the adrenaline wasn't there, because adrenaline pushes you through, but as soon as the adrenaline goes, my body just went no more. So I was really bedbound for a few months. So that's eroded my normal writing pattern. But in terms of prior to all of this, normally I would write about 1.5 to 2,000 words a day.
Wow,
I'm a
that's good.
very, it's not really, I'm very slow. Some people write huge amounts. But as I said, I know exactly what I'm going to write. I sit down knowing, and I also don't write in order. I'm a very much a mood writer, but because I have everything, there's a software called Scrivener. So I have each chapter outlined in Scrivener, and I just cherry pick whichever particular chapter I fancy I'm in the mood for. It helps me not to get kind of
Right.
writing
Yeah.
blocks. So I will write it and then I go back and I edit it and edit it and edit it on the same day so that at the end of the book, I have an almost clean manuscript. I have to do, I mean, I obviously have to proof and I'm very particular about proofing. But I write very cleanly. The thought of having to rewrite and do major edits after finishing the book is abhorrent to me, so I don't work that way at all.
Oh yeah, Helen, our first podcast, she's the same as you, and I was do it all at the end sort of person, but I'm trying to be more like her because I think you're right. So it's a much better way to do it, isn't it? Do it as you go along.
I find editing onerous. I mean, it is the most painful thing for me. I absolutely loathe it. So if I can say each day I do 20 minutes of editing, for me, that's like, oh, God, that's copable. But having like 10 weeks of editing at the end of a novel, I don't think I would ever get a book out. So yeah, it is. I find it much more workable way.
Definitely. So, what's a book that you love and would recommend that every listener should read? Mine, for example, is All Quiet on the Western Front because I loved it so much. It's a brilliant book.
I've never read that. I'm going to read it now that you've said that. Yeah, no, I've never read that one. Mine is kind of an odd. Well, I don't think it's odd. It's always been my favourite. I love Wuthering Heights. People say, in fact, there was a stream recently where I was talking, people were asking this question and I answered, and they went, "Oh, it's a horrendous, it's awful, it's a really horrible love
Really?
story." And I went, "Well, it's really, it's. I don't really think of it as a love story. I think of it more as a tragedy or a gothic tragedy, really. More on along the lines of a Romeo and Juliet or Brief Encounters, the movie Brief Encounter. It's a kind of love story gone wrong, but very dark, very gothic, very brooding. You've got this. It's all set in the moors, and it has that kind of dark atmosphere and such a love that just carries on throughout their lives, but destroying them. I just love it. I absolutely love Wuthering Heights. So, but I do have I've always loved. I could never be a romance writer because I could never write Happy Ever After. I don't think I really I like the stories like The Bridges of Madison County, where it's always a passionate love story that they have to give up each other for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know what that says about me.
I read it at school, but I don't remember a lot about it now. But um, you have several male protagonists in your novels. What's the most difficult thing about writing characters of the opposite sex?
Um,
Are
to be
there any
honest with you,
difficulties?
sorry.
Are there any difficulties? I don't. Yeah, I suppose that's the way I put it.
I didn't find it too difficult because as I said, my two main characters in House of Scarabs male characters were very much based on people. So
Right.
that really helps. And I think for any new budding author, if you can, I mean, it doesn't have to be someone you know. It can be a character in a movie. It can be a character in a book you've read. It could be, someone on the news. But if you can have someone in your head to say, what would they do? How would they act? What? It's always, for me, being a writer is questions. All the way through, it's what would happen now and what's next and how would they react, and it's just a series of answering questions with nice prose hopefully. But it's right, asking yourself these questions. So having someone that I could imagine in my brain and saying how would they react if they were in this circumstance made it very simple. Where I think I would have big problems is if I had to write a spicy scene from the male perspective, because I have nothing nothing to draw on them, and I don't know how people write, unless you really really quiz your partner on how they feel through the process. I mean, obviously we could write from the female perspective. I think that would be really hard. I haven't done that yet. So, yeah. And probably I will have to in my new series. So I will be, yeah, a warning to my male friends. I might be asking a few awkward questions. But I think that for me, that would be the hardest thing. But actually, with
Good work.
Ben, I I wasn't worried about writing the male side of his character, as I said, it was based on someone. What I was really worried about was writing a caricature of an American, because he's American. And I really was worried that he was going to come out as some kind of comic caricature of a, white teeth screaming at the top of his lungs, kind of American caricature of how we see Americans from a British perspective. So when I was looking around for an editor, I actually chose an American editor, specifically for that reason, to make certain that Ben was not, and that I used the right language, that I didn't say, take out the rubbish, but I said take out the garbage. I didn't, that I used the right language.
Yeah.
And it's the, you can go so wrong. I've seen it so many times where Americans write from a British character's perspective and use just tiny words that just give away that this is not a native Brit
That's a
speaking.
really good bit of advice, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So having my American editor, I would go through and say, do you know what a bunk bed is? What would you call that? Do you know? There were so many things. And for instance, what was it, the thing that she changed that made me laugh? Oh, what do we call those things? Sorry, ME brain. When you come up in a boat and you want to go down a level in water. Locks.
Locks.
Yeah, a lock.
Yeah.
She changed them all to another word that was something like lake. I don't think it was lake, but it was something like that. I said, what have you done? And she went, well, what is that? And I had no idea that that was not a word that was used in America. And I was like, no, you can't put that, because that would not be understood at all in the English speaking community, in England, because we call them locks. So those kind of things that, she would edit something and I would go, no, don't do that. And then she would say, no, hang on, this cannot be said from an American perspective. So it was really interesting, that kind of counterbalance of the UK and the American. That I found interesting, and that helped me a lot with Ben, a lot.
I had an American editor. She was offered to do my book for free. So she did the first 10 pages. I had a look at them. And I remember she got confused because I put joss sticks, and presumably you understand what I mean by joss
Yeah,
sticks,
of course, yeah.
And she thought that it was a person, Joss Sticks, Didn't understand that it was incense sticks. Not, to me that was perfectly normal, but from her
Yeah,
perspective, and I never really thought about it, that what I was saying somebody would go, what? A Joss Sticks? Who's he? Who's this character?
yeah, I
And
know.
it
It's so
makes me,
bizarre.
yeah,
Yeah, it's all the little, it's the the fine details of a language or of a culture. Actually, it's not even the language, it's the culture, um, that you cannot possibly reflect, which is why I think things like sensitivity readers are a really good idea as well, for things like
yeah,
black characters or indigenous characters.
yeah.
Just making certain that there's somebody who's got eyes on it who knows that better than you do. That helps. But
My
the
editor
male,
did a bit of that for me, yeah.
yeah, really
Yeah,
helped
he,
me a
he
lot.
went through and wait, you can't say that. um, Profoundly deaf, I think is the term you use now, but I can't remember what the term I used was, but I used an old fashioned term. He's like, no, you can't say that. Profoundly, I think it was profoundly deaf is the term I had to use for one
I,
of my
I,
characters.
I came back from Egypt with a 20-year cultural gap of the UK. It is shocking how things change in 20 years. I came back, and my
Really?
sister works with the hard of hearing, or whatever the correct terminology is. Um, and I came back and I said something about somebody being, which was completely okay when I left England, deaf and
Mm.
dumb, which is what was said when I left England. The look on her face, it was like I'd tried to murder someone or something. And I said, what? You can't say that. What did you just say? I was like, what did I just say? I don't. That happens so many times to me. And again, that's fascinating from a writer perspective, that you can be away from your country for a period of time and it shifts. the language shifts, what is appropriate, what is acceptable shifts, and you can be totally kind of disenfranchised from your own country for a period of time until you start to understand again. Yeah, and I would be hopeless at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I have a big cultural gap in my knowledge.
So, could any of your characters generate a spin-off series?
I have Genesis, which is the prequel to House of Scarabs, has Kia. I spoke about her earlier. And she was such an interesting character when I wrote her. I wrote Genesis purely and simply because I wanted to have a newsletter giveaway. So it's over there somewhere. Sorry. So I wrote this book for that purpose, and it's a novella, but a fairly chunky novella. And I wrote it, and I loved her. She was so interesting and fascinating and complex. And she's basically an Italian slave in Egypt who the gods choose to be the next oracle, which goes against everything that has happened previously. It's been an inherited position up until that point. So the gods basically really upset this family by taking their very prestigious role away and giving it to someone who isn't even Egyptian. And so Kia comes in as an Italian slave, or I can't remember the name of the tribe then, Latin, or I can't remember. She comes in as a slave girl and then takes probably the second highest position in the court of Amenhotep III as his high seer. It's not a real position, it's one I made up, but that's the kind of underlying story of Genesis. I just wanted to explore more, and her relationship with Haramarket, which is the high priest of Egypt. He's a much older man, very wise, very kind, and she's in her early 20s. And they have such a lovely relationship, and I really wanted to explore it more. And I really loved Amenhotep III, the way I'd written him as well. So I've done a novella and 2 short stories as well in the Kia universe. I call them the Kia shorts. And then also in House of Resurrection, which is the book 2 after House of Scarabs, House of Resurrection. The main villain there is called the Phantom. Ooh, his character arc. He goes on a journey in that book, and he's so fascinating to me. I love him, and whenever people read the book, they always talk about him, and I have a whole series in my brain that I would love to do with him, which actually is all about ghosts. So that
Cool.
but I need to get this urban fantasy out of the way and done. So that the new series is 4 books long, so I need to get those written, and then I'll come back and do the Phantom, I think.
Have you ever had any negative experiences as a female writing in the fantasy genre? Do people hold certain expectations of what your work will be like?
No, I haven't really. Nobody's said anything very much. The biggest issue being a female writer, I think, is having to expose ourselves on social media. I'm very introverted, and I'm very shy, and very private, and that doesn't really go hand in hand with having to promote yourself, to promote your book. So you have to be open to presenting yourself in social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, Facebook, etc. And whenever, as a woman, you show your face or you talk or whatever, that can encourage unwanted attention from men.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have had, even despite being a 56-year-old woman who's old enough to be their grandmother, I've had so many lewd, nasty, dirty, smutty messages from men on social media. And I just block them now, and I'm like, your issue, I'm not going to carry your baggage, and I just block them and move on. But when it first happened, it really upset me. And it really upsets me that if I, as a much older woman, am getting this, I can't imagine what the young, beautiful girls are having to face these days. Certainly something that I didn't have to at that age. That's been the hardest thing I would think. But the actual part of being I've never had anybody say, "Oh, I expected fantasy to be written by men," or "I'm not certain I could read a fantasy book written by a woman." I know a couple of authors, male authors, who write romance, and they've had a really hard time breaking in when women have said,
Okay.
"No, I don't think I could read a romance book written by a man." Which is kind of odd because I think it would be interesting, actually. It would be really
Yeah.
interesting to see how a man approaches it differently than a woman. But luckily, I haven't experienced that. Have
I don't
you?
read romances, but yeah, but for writing in the paranormal,
Mm,
not really. No, no, I haven't had any expectations at all. I don't think. No.
mm.
So, what advice would have been valuable to you as a new writer?
Right to genre. Definitely do not smash genres together unless you don't care about commercialism of your work. Yeah, that was a big mistake. I mean, it was the story I wanted to tell, and I'm really glad I told it, and I love it. So I'm glad I did it, but commercially, it's not very sensible. The other thing that I'd never really heard of a trope. I loved reading, and I'm an absolute. I mean, I think I've read 50 books so far this year, so I'm a really, really heavy reader. I read a lot,
Yeah.
but I'd never really heard of tropes. I guess I knew them. I mean, I knew the happy ever after, but I just never heard the word trope. And it was really only TikTok was like a university for me. It was a really eye opening to see these book talkers who are obsessed readers. And some of the book fairs as well, like Rare. I went to the romance authors, crazy, obsessive readers. Crazy in a nice way, but absolutely obsessed and so much more knowledgeable than I was about all of this kind of thing. So I've learned a lot about that, and I think to find an area of right, if I went right back, read widely and find something that you adore and that becomes your passion, and then write in that area. Because if you've read widely in the area, you'll know the expectations, and unlike any other thing I've ever marketed. I mean, I'm a marketeer. That was my background. Normally, you want in marketing, you look for what is unique about your proposition. What is you market by showing the differences. Book marketing was like being slapped round the face with a wet fish and being told, forget everything you've done in your entire career and do the exact opposite. Tell everybody what it's like. I'm like, what? I don't want to say what my competitors. No, tell everybody, books that it's like. Tell everybody it contains these tropes, just like all the other things in the market that they like. So that was a bit of a shock.
Mm.
But for a new reader, reading that, find what you like, understand the tropes, understand the genre, and then stick to that because you'll have so much more fun writing what you enjoy reading. You'll be able to write something that other readers will enjoy because you know the expectation, because it's what you would expect.
Mhm.
And I think that, and also the other thing that I did at the beginning, and my editor was like, "Oh, Hazel, would you stop doing?" I perspective hopped. I would hop from one head to the other and back and
Oh yeah,
forth and
yeah.
back and forth. And I didn't really know that wasn't, I didn't know that wasn't really acceptable. So don't do that either. That's a thing to avoid.
I did that as well. My in my first book, my editor kept saying, you're head hopping, kind of. No, I can't have this.
I
Is it
didn't understand
confusing?
it.
No, I didn't think it was confusing, but he thought it was. So, and a lot of
Yeah.
reviews I've seen people write about that, don't they? So yeah,
Yeah,
great
I
advice.
had a few reviews on House of Scarab, which was the very first book I wrote, and saying that, and I've since completely, I don't do that anymore, but yeah, I did a little bit, and we edited out. What was annoying with House of Scarabs was we edited out so much head hopping, and still afterwards there was still head hopping in. I mean, not so much, only a tiny amount, but even so, it was so annoying.
I think a lot of people think that being a writer just involves sitting at a desk, bashing out a novel. But how much of your time is spent in promoting your books compared to writing it?
Huge amount, huge amount. Oh my goodness. I mean, it depends on, I would say, how much money you have to pour into marketing your books. If you have an endless amount of money, then you can do advertising. Uh, and I found that Facebook is hugely good. It works really well for me for promoting my books. But you need to
I've
have a
not
lot.
tried that yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
have you not? Oh, that really
No,
is
no,
my
I've
main
done
source.
Amazon, but not Facebook. No.
Amazon, it's horses for courses, I think, because some people get Amazon to work really well. I've never been successful with Amazon. At the moment, Amazon is the only thing I've got running because I'm on a bit of a budget at the moment. But Facebook, amazing. I managed to tweak my ads and tweak my ad. And I worked, as I said, in marketing, so advertising is something I was like, right now I know what I'm talking about. So that was easy. But if you're on more of a budget or you're trying to be cost efficient, then you have to really go down the social media newsletter swap routes. And they take so much time. I mean, trying TikToks, I would say I'm on TikTok an hour and a half every day, more or less.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot, a
Oh.
lot. And then what I will do is I have 3 TikTok accounts that I post to, um, 2 Instagram and 1 Facebook, and 1 YouTube. So I will create a post in TikTok that I then, they have the slide photos. So you have
Oh yeah,
flat
yeah, yeah.
photos and you can put
Oh, I
multiple
saw
photos
that.
into a
Yes, yes.
slideshow. Those
Yeah, yeah.
work brilliantly for me, better than the videos. So I will create one of those and then I will take those photos and edit those into a video that I put on the next TikTok account. So it's the same material, but one is a slideshow and on the other account it's turned into a video with effects and music. Because then you've got the same content, you're not having to rework it. And then I repost those onto Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and then also interact with each of the social media for 10 minutes or so to keep the algorithm doing whatever algorithms do. So it's a lot of work, and you just get brain tired. I mean, there's only so many things you can say about your own book over and over and over and over again. And you just get to the point where you're like, surely I'm boring these people senseless. And then I'm like, no, it's an algorithm. You're not seeing, the same people are not seeing it, but I bore myself senseless with it, even though I love my book. It's not the problem of the book. The problem is that you have this limited amount that you can say on a TikTok, and so I find that you spend way more time doing that kind of thing. And then also I went wide. So rather than just stick to Amazon and being in on Kindle, KDP. Is it KDP? No, Kindle
Yeah, yeah,
Unlimited. Sorry, rather than
yeah.
be on Kindle Unlimited, I decided I would go wide and I would sell in Barnes and Noble and Google and Apple and all of the other things.
Mm.
Which, as a philosophy, to not be in a monopoly situation, I think that's a really good idea. On a practical level, it's such a nightmare because you end up, the back matter has to change because you have to direct back to the store that you're in. So I can't put links to Amazon on a Google store or links to Apple on a Amazon store. So all the back matter has to change for each of the books. So that the back matter is when you say, go here to read the next in my series. All those links have to change, which is reformatting the book, different versions. Every time a typo is picked up, I've got about 10 versions of the book that I have to do the typo into, and then I have to upload to 10 different sites.
Wow.
So you end up doing, yeah, wide is hard work, and I haven't found it to be financially worth the effort, to be honest with you. I also have my own bookstore on my website, and I also have a TikTok store where I sell paperbacks. Both of those are new, and I'm trying to kickstart those. So they take quite a lot of effort to just get people to go to your store and be comfortable to purchase direct from you as well. There's an awful lot of work. I mean, if you think, for the readers listening, if you think that a publishing house has marketing, it has IT department, it has a finance department, contractual department, a design department, editing department, etc. If you're a self-publisher, you wear all those hats. So all of those jobs become your responsibility, and you end up writing almost becomes, for me, I would say writing is maybe 40-50%, and the other 50% is all the other noise around it within the small amount of energy that I have of a day.
You're amazing. Lots of info
But
there,
you're
really
similar.
helpful. I don't know really. I mean, I don't think I do anywhere near as much as you. I go on social media. I don't do Facebook advertising. I don't do any paid advertising at the moment because I haven't got a budget for it currently.
Mm.
But yeah, I want to set up a shop on my website. I haven't got one up yet because I've been looking at how to do it. I think I need to get into that sort of thing. So yeah, I'll
Yeah.
take any advice in how to do that.
It's interesting, and I think authors are more and more moving towards that because, firstly, obviously, you get the entire percentage of the money made once you've taken your expenses off. You don't have to give anything to Amazon, or you give a tiny percentage to the platform that you use, but it's really tiny in comparison to the amount that you give to Amazon.
Hmm.
And it's just nice because you have the relationship with the readers. The readers, you've got their details, you're able to communicate with them, you're able to build that relationship. You can, rather than just get an Amazon book, you can get a signed book, you can give them the bookmarks and gifts and other extra, little things that just build a relationship. And I
So
think
yeah,
that's,
you have a TikTok shop, do you?
yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's something I'm thinking of setting up as well.
Yeah. TikTok shop I found really complicated to set up. It's not straightforward. It
Yeah,
was really
so I
every
haven't done
time
it
I
yet.
looked at it, I was like, is this my illness or is this just really complicated? And it was just really complicated. It really is. I found it a headache. But once it's up and running, it's straightforward to manage. It just takes a while to navigate the bizarre system.
So I've also read your other book, Vapours, which is an anthology of your true paranormal experiences. Can you tease us with one of the stories there?
Yeah, sure. Vapors occurred because I had, as I said, I'd written Genesis as a newsletter giveaway to get people into my newsletter, and then I got such positive feedback about it, and everyone, particularly my editor, and my friend, another author, MJ Laurie, who you met at the event recently, all of them were saying this is too good to give away. I mean, it should be part of your portfolio. You should write something else as a giveaway for the newsletter. So I was like, what can I write about? I don't know what to write about. And then I was just chatting to one of my friends, and she said to me, "No wonder you write supernatural suspense after all the stories you've had in your life of like crazy things that have happened to you." And I was like, I don't think I've had really great. And then she reminded me of some of the stories the things I'd told her over the years, and I was like, oh, yeah. And then I was just like, maybe that is why I'm so fascinated by, the supernatural and the paranormal and everything. So I ended up writing. That is over here, definitely this. Oh, this book, which is just called Vapours. It's just a thin little book of short stories. And it's short stories of the various paranormal activities that have occurred to me personally throughout my life. And there's all sorts of stories of some deeply emotionally sad things that happened to me, and some really quite inspiring. One particularly that probably is the most vivid because it was visual and auditory at the same time. I was My family came from London originally, the kind of East London, and we moved down to Wiltshire to Longleat when I was 7-ish. And all of my father's family stayed up there, but we came down, and my mother's parents followed us down as well. And living at Longleat, whilst it was beautiful, it was very isolated. It's in the middle of the countryside. There's nothing around and nothing to do. So when I got to about 12, I nagged, in fact 11 I think it was, I nagged and nagged and nagged my parents that I wanted to go into the local town. I had pocket money. I wanted to spend my pocket money. They were working, and I was like, I'm old enough now. So eventually they let me go on the bus. And I thought I was with my little sister, who's 2 years younger than me. And I thought I was so grown up. And it didn't at all occur to me that every person on that bus knew me really well, knew my parents, and were probably keeping a really solid eye that we were okay. But we went off in our little bus to the local town, and there was a little shop, and it was at the end of a long pedestrian avenue, lane. Either side of the lane were really tall walls, like 6 foot or something. They seemed massive because I was littler, but probably about 6 foot tall. And at the end were 2 rows of little tiny cottages that looked into this pedestrian lane. The doors opened directly into the lane. And there was no cars. It was just a long lane. And at the end of it, we would turn and go into the shop. So my sister and I were walking along chatting, and we were next to the walls, and I turned and looked at her for a second and looked back, and there was a tiny little lady in front of us, old lady. And I was like, where the hell did she come from? Because literally they were like 6 foot walls, and she hadn't been there when I turned my head, and it was a really long lane. There's no way she could have got out of the house and sprinted down to us in time. So it was like jarring. Anyway, she was very tiny. She had a long, very thick wool tweedy coat, and like these very peculiar little boots, a bit like what's the film with Julie Andrews where she plays the nanny?
Oh,
And Dick Van Dyke.
oh, Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins, like Mary Poppins boots, little buttoned boots, which were really odd because they weren't around at that time. It was something really peculiar. And she had a little hat and her hair back in a bun. So my sister and I looked at her, and she said, how's your grandparents? And then named them, Ivy and Fred. How are Ivy and Fred? And then how are your parents? And named my parents. How are, and then named my aunts. And I was looking at this woman going, I have no idea who you are. How the hell do you know about my dad's family? I mean, you're down. I've never seen you in my life before. How do you know my family names? But you know, when you're young and an older person, and she seemed really ancient. I mean, again, from the perspective of, she was probably in her late 70s, but she seemed really ancient to me when I was little. So, and I was just polite, so I answered, and oh, they're fine, thank you. And then I looked back at my sister, and looked back again. She vanished at that, and she was as vivid and as solid as my sister. It was a little old woman stood in front of us who was there 1 minute and disappeared the next. And it really freaked us out. So my sister and I sprinted to the end of the lane and said, we're not going back that way. I walked all the long way around to get back. And this really echoed in my brain. Over the next few months, my grandfather passed away, and we were sent down to spend the summer with my grandmother at, buoy her spirits and everything. And we got talking one evening, and I said, God, the weirdest thing happened to me. This little old lady appeared out from nowhere and was asking about you and Auntie May, Auntie Bren, and Daddy and everybody else. And I've never seen her before in my life. I had no idea. And my grandmother just said, what did she look like? So I explained. And she smiled, really smiled at me and said, 1 second. And then she started like ferreting around in a cupboard. And she pulled out a really old photo and showed me a photo. And it was the lady. So I was like, oh, it must be someone we know after all. So I was like, oh, okay, who's this woman? It's your great-grandmother. I said, I didn't know my great-grandmother was still alive. And she went, she's not. She died when your dad was a little boy. And both my sister and I are like completely frozen. And then Nanny told us the story that she and my father and my aunt and my mother had all woken up in a bedroom in their house with her sat at the end of the bed smiling at them. So it was a common phenomenon that this woman, and my grandmother said to me, if there's anybody on this planet that would want to keep an eye on her family and make certain they're okay, it would have been her. She was 100% family oriented and a wonderful woman. So, and I'd never seen the picture. It was the only picture my grandmother had. Knew nothing about this woman at all because I was only 11, 12. And it was Grandma Affolin.
I remember that story. It was a lovely story. I think that's probably one of my favourite ones in the whole book. But
For me, it was really interesting because you know, I've always had a very practical mind. So every time something like this happened, I go back to the improbability of it, or okay, what else could it be? Could it be an induced hallucination? Could it be all of these? But I think isn't there a Sherlock Holmes quote that when you've ruled out the probable, then the impossible wins, or something like that. Is a quote of that nature. And that's how I felt with these things. When you rule out all of the other possible avenues, then there is only one avenue left, which is that these things actually do occur, and do exist. And to see, particularly with that, particularly in that circumstance, to see someone so vividly. I mean, in my mind, I always thought a ghost would be like a vapory, which is why I called it Vapours, actually, a vapory kind of thing, a see-through, not an actual substantial, completely looking like a person who's also able to talk to you. And the fact that it was linked, and in all of these stories, it's been linked. It's something that is linked to me. That is like I lost a boyfriend. He passed away, and he came to say goodbye. My great grandmother. I mean, in all of these circumstances, there has been an emotional connection, and I was kind of, I don't know if it's an honor or a privilege. I guess it is to some extent. I was in the room when both my grandfather, grandmother, mother, and father passed away, and just before the moment of death, all of them opened their eyes, looked, and had the most radiant beam on their face, as if they'd seen someone and then passed away. And at the moment of passing away, there was tangible presence, is the only way to describe it, with all four of them. A real, it's like the body is no longer, it's just a vessel, it's an empty vessel. But there is a tangible presence in the room. And that has always interested me, that element of the paranormal. And I now truly believe that we are not advanced enough yet to have the science to measure and to see things. But I think it's just a matter of time before science catches up. And just like if the Elizabethans were shown a video, they would go, "Oh, what is this witchcraft?" They wouldn't believe it possible, would they? They would think it was,
no.
And I think that will happen in years to come. What we see as kind of spooky, weird stuff actually will be measurable in the future. And I believe the soul does carry on, and that is something we just can't measure currently.
There's been a lot of talk recently among scientists about the consciousness, can't say the word, consciousness being separate from the body. It's not actually formed by the brain, it's a separate thing. So it's still very early days of it, so perhaps they're right, and we'll find out in the future. Is that what you believe ghosts are, like spirits of the deceased, or do you? What's your view?
I think there's all sorts of different things. I'm a firm believer that material can hold recordings. So when you hear about, I don't know, the same time at the same day, Roman soldiers walking through walls and things like that, but they have no awareness, perceived awareness. They're just to me, that's a video that is being played by some substance within the building that has recorded it.
Stone tape theory, I think they call that, don't they?
Yeah. So yeah. I strongly believe that's true, but I equally strongly, because of what I've experienced myself, believe in the soul or the essence or whatever. I believe that there is something in a person, and when you see a corpse that is no longer there, and it's not, I don't think it's an electrical circuit in your brain. In fact, I know it's not. There is something other that leaves your body when you pass. And I believe that's something other, which for me I would call soul, is what a ghost is. It's something, and in certain people are stronger or are more connected, maybe, to the people that they leave behind, and are able to break through to be seen by people who are alive, and others maybe are weaker or just aren't interested. They want to move on to the next, whatever is next. So, yeah, I think there are many different. I think it's a spectrum almost, as just like there's a variety of different people and characters. I think that there's a spectrum in terms of some things are just, as I said, videos. Some are actual ghosts. Some ghosts actually want to interact in the and do mischievous things in the current world, and so I think there's a whole spectrum of things.
Finally, where can listeners get hold of your books? Are you attending any book fairs? You mentioned you sell on your website, and
I do. I sell on my website, which is www.hazellonguet.com. I have I think it's shop or store or something on there. I also sell on TikTok. If you want signed paperbacks, I sell there as well. I'm at, where am I? I'm at the Torquay Comic Con on the 2nd of August, and I'm also in Leeds at Authors at the Armoury in October. That's about all I can manage this year in terms of physically attending things, because it really
sounds really interesting. The Leeds book fair.
the Leeds one is really good. Oh, you should look into it, because they've had a lot of cancellations because of the American contingent not wanting to travel. So I think there's still places.
Is it worth the journey up there? Because it's even further for you than me, I think.
Oh, it's horrendous journey. We went last year. My friend MJ Laurie, who I was at the event with you where we met, she actually was the attending author last year, and I just supported her. But it was super busy. I would say it's one of the bigger, because it's not just romance. The one in July is romance writers, which I'm not a romance writer. That's crazy. And the next largest that I'm aware of in England is Authors at the Armoury. So yeah, it was super, super busy. I would say definitely worth it. Yeah. And it's a 2-day. I think this year it's 2 days. So you can either do 2 days or as an author, or you can just sign up to do 1 day. I'm doing 1 day, Mel. MJ's doing 2 days.
And where can people follow you online? What's your social media?
I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, and I'm on Facebook, always as Hazel Longuet or Hazel Longuet Author. You'll find me on all of those all the time.
Lovely. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
There are stories galore in volumes by the score on every subject throughout history.